fantasy football draft season is upon us. I'm Austin. I'm joined by Logan, and we have some bold predictions for you guys. And I know a lot of you guys aren't going to like some of these. We got some spicy hot takes. You know what, Logan? I'm going to hop right into the spicy hot one for you. And I'm going to let me know what you think about this one. My first bold prediction of the fantasy football season, T. Higgins will outscore Jamar Chase. Now, I understand. Everyone loves Jamar Chase. They see him doing the gritty, see him doing all the off the field stuff, all the on the field stuff. The guy's superstar. There's a reason he's being drafted as a wide receiver 3 off the board behind Kupp and Justin Jefferson. But let me talk about Jamar Chase and T. Higgins here. When you look at last year, you're looking at T. Higgins going in that wide receiver 11 to 13 range. So not necessarily outside the realm of possibility for T. Higgins to outscore Jamar. But last season, Higgins missed some time, and that helped Chase score a lot of points in fantasy, being a fantasy football rock star. I mean, the guy was average. He was wide receiver 5, averaged 15.5 points per game. If you look at Higgins, he missed four games and still averaged 13.5 or 13 points per game. So the difference was only 2.5 points per game. You also got to think about it, at the end of the year in the fantasy football championships, Jamar Chase had that 50-point game. How likely is it that he has another 50-point game? I think the defenses are going to try to, game plan a little bit more for Jamar Chase. We're going to see a lot of T. Higgins, man on man. We know how tall T. Higgins is. We know Joe Burrow loves to target him in the red zone. That's my first take. T. Higgins is going to outscore Jamar Chase in fantasy football. Logan, how do you like that one?
That's so spicy to start off, but honestly, I mean, it's not as crazy as it might sound, right? Because if you're value hunting, right, I don't love where Jamar Chase is being taken in drafts. He's being taken really high. Like T. Higgins, obviously, to me, has a bigger value. Now, value aside, the chemistry that Joe Burrow has with Jamar Chase is undeniable. On this podcast, I've compared it before to kind of like the Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams previous chemistry of past. Like they're only going to get better, that duo. So at the end of the day, I still think Jamar Chase is that guy. But what you said about T. Higgins is all fair because, as a former, T. Higgins fantasy owner last year, I remember how explosive he was in that offense, in that pass first offense. You definitely want to target, put wide receivers in that offense. So it's spicy though, for sure.
Yeah, I think T is due for a big year. Logan, what's your favorite bold prediction this year?
Okay, so we're jumping into the quarterback position, a position everybody likes to target and not sure what to do with, right? Well, I know what I'm doing with Kyler Murray, and I'm not taking Kyler Murray at all. My bold prediction is that Kyler Murray won't be a top 10 quarterback and might not even be a viable quarterback in like 12-team leagues. I don't see Kyler Murray being there, right? Right now he's being ranked as like quarterback 5, and there's so many quarterbacks I'd rather take. Number 1, I don't trust Cliff Kingsbury in that offense. Cliff Kingsbury, for whatever reason, just doesn't have the red zone offense figured out, and that definitely hurts Kyler Murray's upside to me. Second of all, he's going to be missing Hopkins for several games. And obviously, like when you're missing your top receiver, the production should take a dip. And then third of all, he can't see over the dang offensive line. Like it's about time we sit and start, say, how his height actually does affect his play as quarterback, because he really does have to scramble around the pocket, in different ways that other quarterbacks might be able to see over the offensive line. It's kind of like it's like me playing out there at that size. So I'm going to be honest with you. Kyler Murray is still, to me, just not in that top 10, not in that top 12 range. I think people are a little bit too high on Kyler Murray.
You know what, Logan? I don't actually hate the call. I've talked about it, and if you've been watching our fantasy football videos, definitely can check them out there. We'll link a bunch of them in the description. But Kyler Murray and the QB position as a whole is, I would say, it's one of the deepest we've seen in a hot minute. Like there's probably 12 QBs that wouldn't surprise me that could score more than Kyler Murray. And I don't want to go through listing all of them, but there's still some sleeper QBs out there that people are expecting a big season, maybe like Kirk Cousins, maybe like a Derek Carr that might have more of a consistent floor than Kyler Murray. We've seen Kyler in the past, he earned this big payday. And, we've seen him in the past stumble in the red zone. We've seen them kick a ton of field goals. That's why normally, if you're drafting Kyler Murray, you might as well draft Matt Prater with him, team up him with the field goal. So, you know what? I don't hate that call. I'm actually sticking that quarterback position. I'm going to go with my next bold prediction. Trey Lance. It factors in him. I think he's going to be a top 5 fantasy QB. So you think about the quarterback position, you think at the top of the helm, you got, the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jacksons of the world. I think Trey Lance is going to be right in that conversation at the end of the year. Now, right now, you're going to get QB, right around 12, QB 13 for Trey Lance. So not even being drafted as a QB 1 in 10, even 12-team leagues. But I think at the end of the year is going to be much better than that. I think by even 5 or 6 games in, people are going to be like, dang, how did I miss on Trey Lance? Look at this guy that drafted him. If you look at Trey Lance, he started 2 games, technically played in 3, throwing 15 passes in 3 games. And He averaged 18.7 points per game. The guy I look at the most from last year, Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, by no metric, was a good QB in NFL terms, but in fantasy football, he was a rock star. He was QB9, and that was on throwing just 16 passing touchdowns. 16, that's one per game. That's not a good average. 9 interceptions. Now, I made up some ground, literally and figuratively, by having 784 rushing yards and 10 rushing touchdowns. And while I don't necessarily think Lance is going to have 10 rushing touchdowns, that's pretty tough to do. I do think Lance will be a big majority of this 49ers rushing attack. Elijah Mitchell also injured coming into the year. They're going to rely on Lance. You also look in the two of the 3 games he started, he threw 2+ touchdowns. So if you can get Lance in that 20 to 25 passing touchdown range, I think it's going to vault him into a huge ceiling, a huge floor for a fantasy QB. Top 5. I don't think he's going too far on a limb. Give me some Trey Lance action late on my draft, man.
I love the call, because as long as he's getting some work with his legs in there, right? That's the ultimate cheat code to fantasy football. If you have that dual threat quarterback, and obviously we know Trey Lance is that dual threat quarterback. What worries me a little bit about that one is how run first the offense, for the 49ers usually are. Like the 49ers, you guys ever play Madden? You turn the setting to true clock. Yeah, that's what the 49ers like to do. So that limits your fantasy upside to me. And Kyle Shanahan's not going to change his ways. Like that's still going to be his philosophy, even with a guy like Trey Lance. But where he's being taken and where his upside is, yeah, I could certainly see it. I think there's a lot of quarterbacks that could probably do a lot worse than Trey Lance as far as just value sake.
Like Kyler Murray, for example.
Exactly, like Kyler. How about that?
What's your next bold prediction, Logan?
Yeah, let's go to the wide receiver position, right? And let's talk about one of my guys, my homies, right? I love Adam Thielen, right? And I call this a homer pick, call it a little bit biased, but I think Adam Thielen's going to be a top 15 fantasy wide receiver this year, because I remember all of the chemistry that he has with Kirk Cousins. And obviously, as you mentioned, there's some people out there that I think this is a breakout Kirk Cousins year. It sounds like they do that every year. But, I mean, in a pass-first offense, like Minnesota, where you have Justin Jefferson on the other side, he gets a lot of defensive focus, right? That gives other guys time to step up. And Kirk Cousins, I'm telling you, when it's third and medium or third and long, he'll be looking Justin Jefferson's way. But his safety blanket will always be Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen also has a lot of touchdown upside. With the question, always the injury questions of Dalvin Cook, like, what is this a red zone offense that's probably going to be pass reliant? I probably think so. So I think Adam Thielen's going to get a ton of red zone targets, be a top 15 wide receiver, being ranked as like wide receiver 35. Yeah, incredible value for Mr. Adam Thielen.
Logan, I'm going to be honest. I like it. I think you're a smart dude. I just don't think that's a very smart take at all. And I'm not even going to comment on your take, because my next bold prediction is kind of going to talk about your guy. So I'm taking KJ Osborn of the Minnesota Vikings to finish as a top 35 receiver. So roughly a wide receiver 3 in large majority of leagues, and to outscore Adam Thielen. Not just, be above him, outscore him in a hole. Now you look at Osborn, a lot of people might have just went to Google there. Who the heck's KJ Osborn? Currently going undrafted in basically almost every single league. He's not being drafted at all. He's the wide receiver 3 on this Vikings team. And Osborn last year, surprisingly, the first part of my hot take, top 35, he was wide receiver 38 last season. Thielen was wide receiver 28. He did suffer some injuries. And like you talked about, Thielen does have touchdown upside. But I also think on the flip side, he's going to be very touchdown dependent. Last year, and firsthand, if Thielen didn't get you a touchdown, he was not scoring a lot of fantasy points. He had 10 touchdowns last year. He's also on the wrong side of 32 years old. And if you think about what happens, and I'm not on wood, I hope nothing happens. If an injury does happen to, obviously, Thielen, KJ Osborn stepping into that role. But I think if an injury happens to, a guy like Justin Jefferson, what if something happens like a hamstring injury? You never know. I think KJ Osborn's more fitted, athletically speaking, to go into that Justin Jefferson role than more so a guy like Adam Thielen, who's more of that safety blanket. I love what Osborn has. We also look at last year. You think of Kevin O'Connell coming over for the Rams. Obviously, he's going to instill a lot of that offensive, mindset into this Vikings offense. Hence why a lot of people are like, Kirk Cousins do a big year, because they just saw what Matthew Stafford did in that offense. But last year, think about Van Jefferson. He was kind of that wide receiver 3 on that Rams team. Granted, Robert Woods injuries and whatnot. Van Jefferson was wide receiver 35 last season. I'm not necessarily saying Van Jefferson's better than KJ Osborn or vice versa. I think it's apples to apples, but I really do like me some KJ Osborn today. I'm sorry I trashed Adam Thielen, Logan. You're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, well, the problem is what you said. You're like, well, I'm kind of relying on an Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson injury. Well, if that's part of your analysis, like I don't have a crystal ball to look at injuries, but realistically, I kind of look at him as what sort of role, what sort of niche does he fit into? And he sort of fits the Justin Jefferson role, more of the stretch the field kind of guy. At this age, you kind of mentioned Adam Thielen. Yeah, he might not be a spring chicken anymore, but he's still going to get a ton of work in a PPR type league. KJ Osborn's not going to get a ton of PPR work. You're relying on the big play explosive upside, and that's more of Justin Jefferson's niche.
Yeah, KJ Osborn could maybe be more of like a best ball and Underdog, which shout out to Underdog for sponsoring the channel. If you want to sign up for Underdog, use the code or link down below for a deposit match. But look, he could be a best ball guy that could get you some big weeks. I remember when in our best bets video, I took some KJ Osborn props and he cashed for us, hitting some long touchdowns. So that could be more of that upside, kind of like Van Jefferson was last season. So I'm just saying KJ Osborn's got a chance. That's all I'm saying. And look, you basically don't have to pay anything for him. He's going to be on the free agent wire in basically every single league. So consider go snagging KJ Osborn. Logan, who's your next hot take?
Yeah, we're going to the running back position now, right? We're going to talk about the New England Patriots. I think the Patriots will finally have a stud running back, a borderline set it and forget it starter. And no, it is not Ramondre Stevenson. I think it's Damien Harris. Look, Damien Harris ranked at running back 30 right now. Take it from a guy that had Damien Harris on his team last year. I know how much this Patriots offense does want to commit to the ground and pound, right? Like, you have Mac Jones and that's fine and dandy and all. But again, I love teams that their philosophy is run first. So like that's number one. And number two is I think he's going to overtake Ramondre Stevenson, right? Everyone, is kind of high on Stevenson's upside, but I still remember the explosiveness that Damien Harris has. He has all the touchdown, potential and equity there. And he's still a great athlete. I mean, Damien Harris, everyone remembers the play against the Bills where he just ripped off that long touchdown and what ended up being the deciding factor in that. And what was that? They were just playing in a windstorm. That was a crazy game. But Damien Harris was a big fantasy asset for me. And I think he's just going to be one of those guys that if you drafted him, you're going to be like, thank goodness I drafted him over Ramondre Stevenson because, Damien Harris is here to stay in this backfield.
Yeah, that's kind of – I don't hate the take because I look at this Patriots backfield as one that's very divided, very much like a lot of the backfields in the NFL. You don't get a lot of those workhorse backs anymore in the NFL this day and age. But I think one of these guys is going to be fantasy relevant and fantasy dominant. The other guy is going to be, one guy that's just has a week here and there and only will be useful if one guy does go down. I do like Damien Harris. They like him in New England. He doesn't fumble the ball all too often. He's just a consistent runner ahead. He's north to south. He's north to south. He's not a guy that's going to try to, do 4 spin moves in the backfield and do all the, crazy, won't see him on ESPN top 10 unless he's maybe trucking a guy going downhill. But I do like the take. I think Damien Harris has a chance. I personally, a lot of fantasy football Twitter all over the Ramondre Stevenson hype train. And I just don't know if that's going to pan out too well. You see what happens when a lot of people are all over a guy and then it doesn't end up panning out all too well. And I'm going to kind of segue into my next guy, who's also a running back who a lot of people are very high on this year. And a lot of people might not like this one, which is why I saved it to the end. Austin Ekeler, great first name. You see in the bottom, right to the left of my screen. My name's Austin. I don't want to hate on a fellow Austin, but Austin Ekeler will not be a running back 1 this year. So that means I'm not going to take him in the top 10, not even top 12 running back in fantasy. Now, let's talk about Austin Ekeler because I had him last year in my fantasy league. And to be honest, Austin Ekeler, you carried my team, man. He was putting the team on his back. I had a lot of poor injury choices, poor injury, just things that happen that you can't control. Last year, you look at Ekeler, running back 2 in fantasy football, absolute stud. This year, being drafted, I'm going to say running back 2 to 5. Jonathan Taylor, the consensus 101. Christian McCaffrey, some people are concerned. So some people do have Ekeler in front of Christian McCaffrey. But let's say he's going in that 2 to 5 range for RB. So for me, putting him outside of the top 12, kind of a bold take. Now, last year, you look at Ekeler, ton of touchdowns, 20 of them to be exact. That's not sustainable. I love you, Ekeler. You're not getting 20 touchdowns again. And if he does, well, congrats. You just return a terrific value on where he's being drafted. But I just don't see it happening. If he even goes down to 12 touchdowns, which is still a pretty good year for fantasy, it's losing obviously like 50 or so points. Now it's going to be down to, running back 6 that he was last year. We also look at guys that were outside the top 12 last year. Look at a guy like Dalvin Cook. No one's complaining about Dalvin Cook last year. But he was running back 15. Yeah, look at Derek, and he missed 4 games. Look at Derrick Henry. Obviously, he missed a lot of games. He was running back 16. And while I'm not predicting an injury for Austin Ekeler, if the Chargers continue to use Ekeler like they did last year, he's going to get injured. And I had Austin Ekeler. I needed him a lot of times. They had him on Sunday Night Football all the time. I'm like, dude, I need a big game from you. And he would always, it's Austin Blue Tent Ekeler, because he's always in the blue tent every single game. I just don't know if he can stay healthy. He's even mentioned. I mean, you look at the guys behind him. They got Isaiah Spiller, who they drafted, Josh Kelly, Larry Roundtree. They like these guys, and they really like Isaiah Spiller, who's coming back from an injury in the preseason. But Eckler's even talked on fantasy shows. He talked on other things. He said, I don't want to be a workhorse back. He knows about his contract. He knows about longevity in the NFL, not long for running backs. And he knows if he's used like he was last year, he still only has maybe 1 or 2 more elite years in him. So I think Ekeler will be great in like PPR formats. He's still going to be a good running back in fantasy, but I'm just a little concerned about injury history. Obviously, he avoided majority of injuries all last year, playing 16 games. A little concerned about injuries. And while I'm not necessarily saying Austin Ekeler is going to get injured, I wouldn't surprise me if he misses 3 to 4 games. It's not untypical for running backs this day and age. So Austin Ekeler, not a top 12 running back in fantasy. Logan, how you like that one?
I'm glad you finally came out and said it, right? Because I kind of like teased you when you had Ekeler on your team. I'm like, ooh, he's so injury prone. Aren't you worried about that? And I'm glad you finally addressed, the injury concerns, because look, I love Christian McCaffrey, more than any player in the NFL. But I'd be lying to you if I said, oh, I just know he's going to be healthy and I just know he's going to play a full season, right? Like that's the concern I think you would have with Austin Ekeler. And that's a very valid concern considering where you're going to be taking him in your drafts. Like I look at some other running backs as better options probably. And as you mentioned, this Chargers offense, first of all, what the heck is this Chargers offense going to look like? Are they going to keep playing the Madden philosophy going on 4th down? Like, yeah, like that's a little bit cringy. But then, as you mentioned, there's tons of mouths to feed behind him. Like, why would they try to stretch Austin Ekeler as much as they did last year when you have several, emerging talents behind him? Like the NFL, the modern day NFL is not the workhorse running back. Typically there's a lot of like 3rd down type backs, some change of pace backs. It wouldn't surprise me if even Austin Ekeler is out for a series and you're just like, oh, why is this a Spiller series or a Roundtree series or something like that? Like that's certainly possible. I don't think you want a running back as high as he's going with that possibility.
Yeah, I mean, it does get frustrating. It happened towards the end of last year. It was constantly, he would go in, go out of series. Very, Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon-esque. Yeah. And so I think Ekeler, and I mean, I'm not sold on him at his ADP at the moment. I'm probably going elsewhere, maybe going to one of those guys like Cooper Kupp or maybe even a Justin Jefferson in that range. I think I'd rather take those guys than Ekeler at this point, just given, wide receivers are usually a little bit more healthy than running backs. And I'm just a little concerned about Ekeler. Logan, what's your 4th and final bold prediction?
My 4th and final bold prediction, and this is it's borderline bold, but it's really coming after you because you love talking about this guy. And shameless plug for your video, right? Allen Robinson will have another disappointing year this year, and it pains me to say it because I love Allen Robinson so much. But this is Cooper Kupp's team, and that's not changing. It doesn't matter that they got Allen Robinson, in free agency. At the end of the day, Matthew Stafford has just crazy high, chemistry with Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp's always open, and I don't care what sort of defensive scheme. Like last year was the ultimate year that I'm like, oh, why don't defenses just scheme against Cooper Kupp? Well, you really can't because he's always open. He'll find a way to get open, and he does draw too much of a target share. To me to really look at Allen Robinson. Also, I think Allen Robinson needs a lot of touchdowns to be productive. I go back to when, I had him on my fantasy roster several years ago when he was still fantasy relevant. And really what made him fantasy relevant was getting those touchdowns. And if he's able to get those touchdowns again with the Rams, hats off, then he was a great, value pick. But I think his stat line more often than not might look like 3 catches for 28 yards or 4 catches for 35 yards, something like that, which is not really fantasy usable. So, and I think also the Rams this year might run the football more. I know that's kind of crazy to think and say, but I think that's just the Rams offensive philosophy, right? It's going to be, some short passes to Cooper Kupp, some running the football. And I don't really see where Allen Robinson fits in fantasy wise. I know you love him for the value, but I don't think he's really worth the draft pick late. Like I would rather take a guy with more upside.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly rising up, drafts at the moment. His ADP continues to go up, and I don't really want to talk minutes and minutes about Allen Robinson when people could check out the videos, and I'll link them on the screen in 2 seconds about why exactly I think Allen Robinson is a fantasy superstar this year, at least value-wise. I think he's due a pretty big year. Obviously, Cooper Kupp's going to do a big workload, but I don't know, Logan. You might be sleeping on A-Rod. Maybe you got a little bit of hurt feelings after he burned you a couple years ago.
Yeah, well, he did, but I know, like, take it from experience. When he's not getting those touchdowns, it is a little bit disappointing. But I mean, I reference the people to go back and watch your fantasy videos and then form an opinion for yourself. Do I want to take this guy? Do I want to listen to some schmuck named Austin, or do I want to take the opinion of a genius like Logan?
Yeah, we'll see about that. Those are our 8 fantasy bold predictions in almost 20 minutes. If you want to check out the 2 fantasy football videos we kind of just hinted at, they're both linked on the screen. Go check them out. Give you 5 wide receivers that I think could win your league. I'll give you a hint. Allen Robinson's one of them. See you guys in the next one. Peace out.